My name is Juliana Nicolasian with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Friday, January 20th, 2012. I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, interviewing Marcia Mitchell. This interview is being conducted as part of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Marcia was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 2011. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's nice to visit with you.
Well, let's begin by learning a little bit more about you. Could you tell us where you grew up and a little bit about your early life?
Well, I grew up right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm one of those few left that are native Tulsans. And I went away to school at Drury University. But other than that, I've been right here in Tulsa my whole life. My parents owned a chain of bakeries. So I grew up, a great deal of my time was spent in the back of a bakery, and I learned a lot in the back of the bakery, and worked there in the summer times and a lot of Saturdays growing up. And so I'm very thankful to my parents because they taught me a lot through that process.
Were your parents originally from Tulsa?
My mother was, but my father was actually a Floridian. So he's from the deep south.
Okay. And growing up, you're young, you're a little girl. Are you attending big schools, small schools?
Actually, I attended just a regular elementary public school and just the typical size, and then Horace Mann Junior High School in Tulsa, and then transferred to Edison. And that was a larger school. And there, yes, it was a very large graduating class.
And during this time, are you gravitating towards any subjects that you just really like, enjoy?
You know, yes, especially as I got into junior high and high school, I loved speech and drama. I also loved English, and so early on, I was kind of moving in that direction.
Okay. And did you become a pretty good baker?
Well, no baking, but I did have kind of an interesting uh, uh, promotional experience in the back of the bakery. I actually, my very first job, I was 4 years old, and my dad knew that they had a big challenge in the back of the bakery because they had these huge room size ovens, and they did a lot of deliveries. So the back door was, constantly sliding open and closed to get the cakes and so on out to the delivery truck. And they, of course, they couldn't air condition, and so he had a constant challenge with flies. And so he put a fly swatter in my hand, and he told me that he would give me a penny a fly. And of course, that was very exciting to a 4, 5, and 6-year-old. And so I really got very good at it by the time I was like 6 or 7 years old, and was quite fast with the fly swatter. And yet, that particular little occupation came to a screeching halt one day because I got so good at it. I actually killed 100 flies in the course of one weekend, and got a whole dollar, of course, and I was so proud of my dollar that I went to the front of the bakery and was showing all the customers the dollar that I earned and telling them how I earned it. And so my dad decided that maybe it was time for me to no longer kill flies. And from that point on, I folded boxes. I'm sure you've seen those big bakery boxes. Well, they have to be creased and folded. And so I put together bakery boxes for a number of years. And then he decided I was old enough to stand on a Coke crate and ice cakes. And I was taught how to ice cakes. Remember, I iced many a chocolate cake. And I always looked yearningly at the decorators. I thought that would be the coolest thing in the world to learn to decorate cakes. And eventually they did teach me to decorate, and I have that skill to this day, and I'm very grateful for it. Not everybody can really decorate cakes, and so it's a lot of fun. I've used that skill throughout the years. And so I got to work across from some really wonderful women and decorate cakes. It took me one whole summer to master roses, but I finally mastered learning how to make really pretty roses. And so I decorated cakes, And then I went away to college, and because I went to summer school, I chose to do a summer program. Actually, it was a theater arts program. Each summer, I never came back home to work in the bakery again. And they actually sold the bakeries right before I got married. And so and that was definitely the end of my bakery career. But I learned a great deal in the course of all of that. And because I actually did start working at the age of 4. And again, until I was tall enough to reach the top of a table, I was standing on Coke crates. And I remember that to this day. And I didn't like it at the time. I thought I was having to work way too hard. But it really taught me to work hard. It taught me good work ethics. And of course, I had to be on time to work, and I couldn't slack. And so it was teaching me something very valuable, though I didn't recognize it at the time.
Mhm. Are you an only child? Do you have...
No, I actually have an older sister. She's 3 years older than me, and I had a younger sister who passed away when I was just a little girl.
So family was always very important?
Family was always important, and I always think of my dad as the one that really taught me the importance of being able to work hard. And he had had to work hard his whole life. And that was one thing he really wanted to impart and make sure that we were able to persevere and that we had the stamina to work hard. And that proved to be very valuable in the years ahead when God called upon me to be the one to actually launch this work. And if my dad hadn't taught me to persevere and to have a lot of stamina, I think I would have given up many a time. But he had taught me that. My mother taught me so much too. They both taught me a lot about integrity and honesty. My mother was one to want to make sure that there was balance in my life and it wasn't all work. And so she made sure that I had dancing lessons and had some fun thrown in there. And she also taught me two of my most important life lessons. And one of them was where there's a will, there's a way. Not give up. And when there's a challenging situation, it looked like there's no way to look again, because where there's a will, there's a way. And I've just seen that proven true time and time and time again in my lifetime. And she just had a do or die. This can work. You can figure this out. You can do this. Attitude toward everything. And she also taught me to pray. Always pray. I remember the way I learned how to decorate cakes. My parents had an order for a huge wedding cake, tiered cake size, 4th of July cake for a country club. And so all the decorators, by the time it was delivered, the 4th of July, everybody was off on vacation, except the delivery guy was just delivering the cake. Well, he hit a bump on the road. The cake went up, the truck went down, and they did not meet in between well, and the cake was just, the decorating on it was just destroyed. The cake was still intact. He called my parents, of course, and said, I have destroyed this cake. Of course, very expensive, a big order for this country club. So, of course, my mother could not get in touch with any of the decorators. And she looked at my older sister and I, and she said, girls, today you are going to learn to decorate. So she took us to the bakery and she put decorating tubes in our hands, and the whole cake practically was just these little stars, which is the most simple thing you can do on a decorated cake. And we did stars all day until we finished that cake, and it was delivered to the country club. But it was a classic example of where there's a will, there's a way. And, some people might have said, we can't get it done. But they were also people that were really committed to, if you given your word, you stay true to that. And so they had committed to having this cake there. And the cake was paid for, and she was going to make sure that it was delivered, and it was a beautiful cake. And it was. I'll never forget it.
And what was the name of the bakeries?
The bakeries were Mary Lou's Pastry Shops. And I'm sure many Tulsans, if they view this video, they will remember chocolate eclairs and so many different types of breads that they make, fruit nut bread and salt raisin bread, but particularly the chocolate eclairs people will remember.
Well, you decided to leave Oklahoma for college.
Yes, my sister had gone to Drury University for a short time, and I had visited her and really loved it. It was a small campus. I graduated from Edison, so it was a huge graduating class, and Drury was very small, but I liked that idea. And so, very, very excited about going there, and really never had a regret.
Growing up, did you have an idea of what you wanted to become when you got older?
You know, when I was real little, I remember dreaming of being a missionary, and I always envisioned myself in Africa. I'm not sure why, but to me, missionaries were in Africa when I was really little. And then as I got into my high school years, I think greatly because of my little sister, my aspirations changed. My little sister would have been special needs, and she died when she was 5 and had been sick much of her life. And we adored her. My older sister and I would like dress her up and pretend she was a doll, and we really did just adore her. And so she really remained in my heart always. And as I, got a little bit older and was exposed to more of the world and what's out there in the world that you can become, I became acutely aware of the whole arena that could help a child with special needs. And in particular, I was interested in speech pathology and did my senior paper on becoming a speech pathologist. I still have it. And got an A on it. I was so proud of that paper, and some really nice comments from my English teacher who I adored. She had a real influence on my life. And then I met with a high school counselor who discouraged me from becoming that. And right or wrong, I kind of bought into what he was saying. And he just didn't think that that was a good match for me. And so things just kind of fell into place for me to go to Drury University. And they didn't even have a program in that arena. But they did have a wonderful speech and drama department. And so I just felt strangely pulled into that arena and loved that experience. We were required to do be involved in 3 productions a year, and so it was very, very. It required a lot of endurance because you end up studying in the wee hours of the morning because you're usually at rehearsals until late night. But I loved the experience and had a lot of lead roles in plays the whole time I was there, and choreographed musicals, and thoroughly enjoyed. I have some of the most wonderful memories of being a drama major at Drury. Also some of the hardest, because I remember having to stay up all night studying because I had been at rehearsal so late. And I can remember saying, after I graduate, I will never, ever again stay up late unless I absolutely have to. I'm going to make sure nothing mandates that I have to stay awake at night. So to this day, I still love going to bed early, and I really love being able to get a full night's sleep.
You graduated in?
I graduated from high school in 1963, and I graduated from college in 1967. I actually graduated in 3.5 years. I graduated in January, but I went back for the graduation in June of 67.
Why were you trying to speed it up?
I really wasn't intending to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I chose being involved in drama over the summer than being in the back of the bakery, to be honest. But actually, there was a summer children's theater arts program that I chose to be in each of the summers, and that gave me hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually would take another course along with that. And so, to my amazement, as I entered my senior year, I realized, though I had not intended to do so, I had the credits to graduate in January. So I did.
So you're nearing graduation. Are you thinking, all right, I'm ready to hit
What am
hit
I
the
going to
big time,
do?
or
Actually, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I graduated with all that I needed to become a teacher, speech and drama or an English teacher, and had already done my student teaching and loved student teaching. I knew I loved teaching, but I still wasn't sure I wanted to dive into teaching immediately. So got home and was just kind of like, the world was out there and what was I going to do? And for a very short period of time, considered maybe I'd like to be a flight attendant. Until I realized at that time, I was too short. Now that would not make a difference, but I was too short. So that was a very short-lived dream. And when I realized I wasn't going to be able to do that until I could get a teaching contract, I decided that I would, wait for a teaching contract. And in the meantime, I did some substitute teaching and choreographed a musical at Memorial High School, and really enjoyed those months.
and so you're teaching, everything's great. What's going on?
Well, actually, very soon after I got home from college, my dad had some banking business that he needed to do, and he asked me to go with him. And we walked into actually, it was a savings and loan. And there was a gentleman there that I had known as a child. His family and my family had always been good friends. And I had not seen him since I was a child. And he looked very different. And evidently I looked very different to him. He saw me across the store or the savings and loan. And anyway, long story short, we were reacquainted and began to date and fell in love and were married in July of 1967.
All right.
And so we were married for about 3 years, and we decided we wanted to begin our family. And I knew immediately I wanted a baby girl. And everybody said, you shouldn't want a boy or a girl. You should just want a normal, healthy baby. And I wanted a normal, healthy baby girl. And excuse me, I did everything everybody advised. Like they said, wear a lot of pink, sing little girl songs. I would have done anything that anybody advised me to do to hopefully increase my chances of having a baby girl. And on August the 11th of 1970 at 11:59 p.m., I finally heard the doctors say, well, it's a girl. And, I cannot express to you what joy I felt in that moment. And that moment actually was the beginning of a whole new world for me that I had no idea that I would ever enter. I had taught for the past 3 years. I retired from teaching to have our baby girl. And, I just thought I would be a retired school teacher, now mommy. And 24 hours after she was born, the doctors came in and said, I guess you have a special baby. And I said, well, of course she's special. I didn't expect everybody in the world to agree, but I felt like she was very special. And the doctor said, no, I don't think you understand. You see, she's very special because she's very rare. Only 1 in 50,000 babies are born like her. She has been born with a very rare condition, which among other things means that she will be, at best, legally blind. But her vision is going to range somewhere between less than normal and blind. You're not going to know where it's going to fall for about 5 years, but you need to know that now. And I didn't hear anything else that the doctor had to say. My whole heart and mind and being froze on one word: blind. I had never, ever in a million years imagined that this would happen. But as he continued on, my mind raced back to a time when I was a little girl. And I was sitting on a porch step with another little girl, reading to her because she was totally blind. She was a wonderful little friend, and I adored her, and I was in awe of what she could do. One of the things that she did so well was to play the piano beautifully by ear, and I was so intrigued with her that we asked who her piano teacher was. And I was introduced to her piano teacher and began to take from him. And I was equally fascinated with him because he could tell always whether I had the right fingers on the right keys or if I hit a wrong note, even though he too was totally blind. And as I thought about her, and then I thought about him, and then my mind raced on as this doctor was talking on and on to a time when I was in college. And one of the plays that I wanted to audition for was The Miracle Worker, the story of Helen Keller. And so to prepare for that role, over a period of a month, I spent most of my time under a blindfold and with cotton in my ears, experiencing the world of the blind, and was awarded that role and studied the life of Helen Keller in depth and what it was like to be blind. And I will never forget that experience. And so as I lay there in the hospital room, and this doctor was talking on and on about our child and that she might not ever see, those were the memories that flooded my mind. And then I also remembered my first day of teaching, discovering that I had had a totally blind student in my classroom. And so I was remembering that throughout my life, I had been constantly exposed to blindness, but never imagining this. And quite honestly, what happened in that moment was, and especially after the doctor walked out of the room and I continued to kind of think on all of those things, all of a sudden it was almost as though my life was a puzzle. And now this piece had been put into place. And it was as though all of that had been a preparation. But I didn't want that preparation. And everything within me wanted to shout, no, no, no. I don't want to have been prepared for this. And I cried for the next 3 days. And I asked one question over and over and over again, and that was, why? Why, Lord? Why have you done this to us? How could you do this to us? And I didn't get an answer for about, like I said, about 3 days. And then one day my husband was supposed to have arrived at the hospital room, and he was very late. And so I was very curious as to why he was very late. And when he finally got there, I asked him why he was so delayed. And he had a hard time explaining. But I remember he walked over by the window and he said, I was on my way here, and I began to wonder how we will describe this big wide world to our daughter if she cannot see. And he said, as I studied the world around me, wondering what words could we possibly use that would adequately describe, he said, honey, it was as though God opened my eyes for the first time. And he said, I looked at birds in flight, and I, for the first time, noticed just how graceful they move through the air. He said, I noticed clouds really in a way I had never paid attention to them, and how every single one is different, and how the shapes and the forms are so varied. And he said, I noticed how white they are against the blue sky. He said, I just saw things in a whole new way. He said, grass was no longer just a big green mass, but it was trillions of tiny individual blades. He said, I just couldn't take everything in enough, and I just kept driving. And as I listened to him, I remember looking at the roses by my bedside that someone had delivered, and wondered how we would describe those to Missy if she could not see. We had named her Missy. And all of a sudden they became much more brilliant in color than they had been just moments before. And I believe that what happened that day was that we began to see in a whole new way. But I believe it was not so much just that. We also began to see that this was not something that God had done to us, but rather something God had done for us. He had allowed us to give birth to a beautiful baby girl who, in her infancy, had begun to teach us before she could even talk. And her life had begun to lead us closer to God before she could even walk. And we decided that day, you can't get much more blessed than that. And we had no idea what all God was going to do through her. So we took her home, and we had asked the doctors, what do we do? And they said, well, you take her home and you love her and you just treat her like a normal child. So we took her home and we loved her. But treating her like a normal child was something else, because there were so many things we didn't know. I knew just enough to know. I knew just enough about blindness and about education to know that we did not know enough to be able to provide for her the early intervention that she needed. And we knew that she was not developing as rapidly as other babies her age. We knew that when we smiled at her, she didn't smile back at us. And so I began to worry a lot. And the days passed and the months passed, and I just became almost frantic. Until one day, I remembered something my mother had always said to me. She had always said, Marcia, just pray. Just pray. When you don't know what to do, just pray. And so I began to pray that God would somehow send us help, because I knew how much she needed. I knew the value of the first 6 years of life, that those are the most important learning years we ever experience. And I knew we were wasting valuable time, but I did not know how to teach her. And so we prayed, and very soon after that, we learned about a place in Oklahoma City. It was the only place that we could find. There was nothing in Tulsa that worked with children who were visually impaired until they reached the age of 6. Well, I knew that that was too late. I knew that there were children being placed in classes for the mentally challenged, even though they were just blind at the age of 6, because they were so developmentally delayed because of their visual problem that they were misdiagnosed. And so when we finally learned about the closest place to us being Oklahoma City, we wrote and asked if they would be willing to help our child. And they wrote back and said, we actually only work with deaf-blind children, but we would be willing to at least see her. So then for a month, I worried about the fact that Missy wasn't deaf. I knew she wasn't deaf, and my husband said, my word, if you don't have something to worry about, you dream something up. That's ridiculous. And I said, but I want them to accept her. And I was so desperate for help that that's the way my mind went. But eventually we took her over to Oklahoma City, and we were greeted there by just some wonderful professionals, teachers and therapists, a social worker, and they greeted us warmly. I remember dressing Missy up in her best pink frills and lace, thinking maybe that would influence them. And after they kind of oohed and awed over her, they said, why don't you put her down? And they instructed me to just place her in the middle of this big room on the floor. And I remember stepping back, praying, dear God, please don't let her do anything wrong. Now, what a 5-month-old baby can do wrong, I don't know, but I didn't want her to do it. And they just watched her. And the first thing she did was to stick her thumb in her mouth. And I remember thinking, oh, don't do that. And just as quickly as I had that thought go through my mind, one of the teachers went over and swooped down and picked her up and began to pat her on the back, saying, oh, Missy, that is so good. That is so good. And I looked at her, I'm sure, so strangely, and she smiled, and she said, oh, you don't realize what she's done, do you? And I said, I guess not. And they said, oh, this is wonderful. she's discovered her midline. I said, her midline? I didn't know we had a midline. And they said, yeah, she's discovered her midline. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, we have a midline, and we have an arm on the right and an arm on the left and a leg on the right and a leg on the left. And right in the middle is our mouth. And she has discovered that midline. Do you understand how wonderful that is? That means that she can now feed herself, and she can do patty cake. And so many things that we do involve our midline. That is wonderful. You have cause to celebrate. I was so proud of that baby. Well, in that moment, I learned something else wonderful and valuable. I learned how important it is for teachers to affirm parents. I felt like we must have done something right because that baby had done something so good. And so they put us on what they called a Child Study Center home program. And that meant that they sent us back to Tulsa to follow a specific program for her. They wrote it all out on a legal pad. Complete, I remember, with little diagrams, and they would draw little stick figure girls, and they'd always put a bow on the top of her head. And then we would carry out their suggestions at home. They were so simple, but they were so profound in the impact that they had. For example, they suggested that I carry Missy on my back as long as I could stand each day. And I thought, what on earth is that going to do for her? But I remember that they asked me, one of the first questions they asked me is she a good baby? And I said, oh, she's a wonderful baby. They said, is she content to be left in the crib for long periods of time? And I said, oh, yes, she is. And they said, you need to get her out of the crib, and you need to get her on your back. And I wondered what good that would do until the first morning when I tried it, and I put her on my back. And I remember going to the kitchen and realizing that as I opened the oven door, she was feeling the heat from the oven door opening and closing, and the cold from a refrigerator door opening and closing. She could smell bacon frying and hear it sizzling. She could feel my posture changing as I bent over to make a bed. She could feel the vibration in my back as I spoke. All of this just from one little suggestion. And at that moment, I realized the value of expertise being lent and providing a child the early intervention that they need when they have special needs. And so we carried out their suggestions. They suggested that I wear a certain kind of perfume, lots of it all the time, so that Missy would know if I even entered the room. Because a sighted child sees mommy enter the room and feels, oh, all is well with the world, there's mommy. But a blind child doesn't see you, and so doesn't know that you're there when you're in and out of the nursery. And so they said, you want her to know of your presence. My husband was advised to wear a certain kind of men's cologne, same kind, lots of it all the time, so that she would know when he was near. Of course, our friends knew we were coming for miles because we were always doused with that same kind of perfume and cologne. But all of these suggestions worked wonders. And by the time Missy was 1 year old, she was functioning at a normal developmental level, to our joy and delight. But all the while I was worried, this time about another little girl. Every time I heard about her, it was a burden because she too was visually impaired. People kept telling us about this family and suggesting that we get together with them, but we didn't know them. We knew of them. And so we just didn't feel comfortable calling them, even though we were in the same city. Well, little did I know they kept hearing about us. Every time they turned around, every time we turned around, we would hear about each other, but we just didn't know each other well enough to call. And we just knew that we both had little girls who were visually impaired. But one Sunday morning, God took care of all of that. We were all ready to go to church. And Missy and I were standing out next to the driveway, waiting for my husband, Phil, to back the car out of the garage, when all of a sudden he closed the garage door and said, we can't go. I said, what do you mean we can't go? He said, the car's dead. I said, but that's terrible. We're all ready to go to church. And it took a lot to get ready to go to church with a baby. And he said, honey, I'm sorry, the car's dead. I don't know why it's dead, but it's dead. And we just can't go to church. And I said, well, why don't we just walk? He said, because it's 10 miles to church. And I said, no. I mean, why don't we just walk to the little church down the street? We'll just visit there this morning. We're all ready to go. And he said, okay, but hurry up, because if there's two things I cannot stand, It's to be late to church and the others to have to sit up in front. And if we're late, I know we'll end up in front. So we rushed with the diaper bag and all of our paraphernalia down the street. And when we got there, the parking lot was jam-packed and the lobby was empty, which meant only one thing. We stepped just inside the back of the sanctuary, and I was looking around, unable to spot an empty seat anywhere, when all of a sudden I realized that an usher had spotted us and was smiling broadly and motioning for us to come forward. Well, I knew he was already too far forward to suit my husband. He was about halfway to the front of the church, but it was too late. People were beginning to turn around and look. And so we began to follow this usher, and he kept going and going and going. I thought he would never stop, and he didn't until he reached the second row from the front of the church, where he ushered us into literally the last two seats available. And those last two seats just happened to be next to this couple. The couple with the visually impaired little girl that by this time we had been hearing about for over a year and a half. And somehow I just knew that morning that God had orchestrated our meeting. We call it our miracle morning because we became very close friends. And of course, immediately told them about the program in Oklahoma City. And they immediately signed up and scheduled a time to go back to Oklahoma City with us. But it was during that visit that the professionals there explained that it wasn't going to be enough for their little girl, who had reached the age of 2 by that time. And they said, she needs a program in Tulsa. Are you sure there's nothing there? Or you need to move here. Well, there was no way that they could move. And so all the way home, we talked about it. And then finally something very special happened. I don't really remember who said what to whom, but one of us said to the other, wouldn't it be wonderful if Tulsa could have something like that in Oklahoma City? And we just began to dream about it. And by the time I reached home, we were determined to get someone to establish a program like that. And we had even begun to strategize exactly how we would go about it. We would visit with every doctor, administrator, director that we could get an appointment with, and we would convince them of how vital it was to Tulsa and that Tulsa had no such program. And so we began to set up our appointments. Now you can imagine how thrilled these CEOs and directors and administrators and doctors were to see these 2 young moms in their 20s with bouncing baby girls on their laps. But they each one did see us, but each one had the same response. I'm sorry, ladies, we just don't have the staff. I'm sorry, ladies, you're right. It sounds like an important program. I'm sure there are others in the community like yourselves that need it, but we don't have the space. I'm sorry, ladies, you're right. It's a viable program, but we don't have the funds. One reason after another until I was ready to give up. But Cheryl, the mother of this other little girl, had this childlike faith. I had been a Christian since I was 12, and I had always felt that I had a lot of faith. But this was way, way beyond anything I had ever imagined. And she just had this childlike faith. And she believed that we should just keep trying, that God would make a way. So we set up an appointment with one last pediatrician. I figured he was the only one we hadn't talked to in Tulsa. And finally the day came, and we sat across a big brown desk from this rather austere-looking gentleman. And by that time, we really had our routine down pat. I would talk until I ran out of things to say, and then she would pick up where I left off, and we thought maybe we could just wear somebody down. And so that day we had our appointment, and I remember him looking over reading glasses at us and saying, what can I do for you? Well, I started in, and I talked as long and as fast as I could, and when I ran out of steam, Cheryl picked up where I left off, and when she ran out of steam, I picked up where she left off. We told him about all the children that had to be here in Tulsa, and the importance of early intervention, and how desperate we were, and how there needed to be something, and about the program in Oklahoma City. And and that he was the last, and could he please help us? And I remember there was a very long, very uncomfortable pause, and finally he said, "Ladies, it sounds to me like if you want this center, you're just going to have to build it yourselves." Well, I was just outraged. I had had it by that time. I couldn't believe that these people were turning us down, and they had to understand that we couldn't do anything like that. All the way down the hallway, I expressed my irritation about this man, and all the way down the sidewalk, I expressed my irritation with this man. In fact, we had been sitting in the car for quite some time, and I was still expressing how angry I was with all of them, for that matter, when all of a sudden it dawned on me that Cheryl hadn't said a word. She was sitting there with the most angelic looking expression on her face. And then it hit me. I said, "Cheryl, you are not thinking what I think you're thinking." And she smiled sweetly. I said, "Cheryl, we wouldn't even know where to begin. We wouldn't even know how to start to begin a program like that." And she smiled. And she said 3 words I'll never forget. "But God does." I said, I know, I'm sure that's true. But Cheryl, if those doctors think it's going to be so expensive to start a program like that, I don't even want to know how expensive it would be. And we don't have a dime to begin a program like that." And she smiled and she said those 3 words again, "But God does." And I came face to face with a question. Did I really believe what I had always said I believed? That God could do anything? Because I knew we couldn't. I was a retired school teacher. She was a homemaker. I knew that we didn't know the first thing about starting a program like this. But by the time we got home, Cheryl's faith was so strong that she had convinced me that we should just trust God and that He would show us the way. I'll never forget my husband's face when I walked into the living room and I said to him, "Well, honey, guess what we're going to do?" He said, "What?" as he looked at his newspaper. And I said, "We're going to start a wonderful program for children with special needs. And it's going to be complete with medical consultants and therapeutic equipment and specialists and teachers." And by that time, his paper was coming down. He said, "Honey, you've got to be kidding. You wouldn't even know where to start." I said, "I know, but God does." And he said, "Well, that may be true, but you don't have any money." And I said, "I know, but God does." And so much as you would pat a child on the head and send them on their way to build their sandcastle or whatever they're going to do, that's pretty much what our husband's response was. But like I said, Cheryl had this incredible kind of faith. And I don't have time today to tell you what all happened, but I can tell you that I found out the answer to my prayer. And the answer to my question. Did I really believe what I'd always said I believed? And I had asked God to show me. And my prayer and my question was answered on October 3rd, 1972, when the doors to a little tiny school, a program for visually impaired children, opened its doors. It was at 10th and Utica. We had 5 children, 5 very dedicated volunteers, and 1 teacher. And we called it the Little Lighthouse. And we had raised $3,000 by the grace of God that I hoped would last forever. And of course it did not. But that was the very beginning. The Child Study Center agreed to kind of serve as consultants to us, and they did. And that was the beginning of a whole new world for me, a world that I'd never imagined being thrown into. But it was at that point in time that I began to realize a calling on my life. Cheryl was pregnant, and so I was asked to serve as executive director. And we had 2 staff, the teacher and myself. Well, 40 years later, almost 40 years later, I can tell you with even more certainty the answer to my question. Yes, God can. He really can. Over the years, we've served hundreds, nearly 1,000 children. Now, the children are not just visually impaired, they are children with all types of disabling conditions. Interestingly, within the first year and a half of the Little Lighthouse's existence, we were referred to as a model program throughout a 6-state region. And so God really had us on a crash course. He moved us very fast, and He provided every inch of the way. We continue to rely on God and to trust Him for provision, for guidance, for encouragement, for comfort when it got rough. And there were tough moments. But He has continued to make a way in every single situation that we faced. Today, we sit in a beautiful 22,000 square foot facility that was tailor designed for these children. And we moved into it in April of 1990. And it was a $2.2 million project, and we moved in debt-free. The children and the families pay no tuition, and we don't receive any government funding, and any kind of United Way funding. We are 100% supported by private donations. And that makes it, to me, a miracle that we continue to operate. Our budget now is about $1.7 million a year. We never know where it's going to come from, but in all 40 years, we have never gone a dime in debt. And as I mentioned, we'll celebrate our 40th anniversary next October of 2012. And so it's been quite a journey. My daughter is now 41. She says she will never be able to hide her age, because everybody identifies her as having been one of the inspirations for the founding of the Little Lighthouse. We're very proud of her. She is an amazing young woman. She actually went to Oklahoma Baptist University and then went on later and got her master's degree. She does grant writing for the Little Lighthouse now, and also does our monthly publication, and teaches private voice and piano in her home. At the age of 32, she actually got a driver's license. She is technically legally blind, but she was fitted at Johns Hopkins Hospital with state-of-the-art contact lenses, and they declared her able to drive. And so now she drives, and that opened up a whole new world of independence for her. But I think she serves as a real inspiration to a lot of youngsters. She has done just about everything she set her mind to. She wanted to go snow skiing, and she went snow skiing. She went backpacking in the Colorado Rockies, a 20-mile hike. So she really hasn't let her vision stand in her way. And like I said, we're very proud of her. She continues to be an inspiration to me to this day.
How did you come up with the name?
Actually, an attorney called us because he was working on the legal papers. We didn't even know what a 501c3 was, much less that we would need to acquire a 501c3 status. So we finally, an attorney took pity on us and said, "You need to let me help you." And he called and said, "I need a name." And we were sitting at my dining room table, and we knew we were going to be working with blind children. At that time, it was just going to be for the blind. And as I said, now we serve children with all disabling conditions. But we knew of New York. In New York, there was a lighthouse for the blind. And so we thought, well, we're going to be serving little children who are blind, so why not Little Lighthouse? And so we chose that name. Now we see it in a whole different light. I think it was God ordained that we name it Little Lighthouse, but now we see it more as a beacon of hope for families with these children with special needs.
And today, how many students do you serve?
We have 64 children on a day-to-day basis, and when we expand, we will be able to serve more than double that amount. The sad news right now is that we have over 100 waiting to be served. And that's a 2 to 3 year wait. And since we serve birth to 6 and have continued to be an early intervention program, we're losing half our time with these children. So we are very excited to be able to build this expansion, which we pray will be not only a school for these children, but actually these classrooms have become a classroom to our world. And let me explain that. We have had delegations from over 23 nations visit the Little Lighthouse. We now have an international intern program where individuals come from all over the world. We've had them from India, from Kazakhstan, from Kenya, from China, from the Philippines, from Germany, really from all over the world. And they come as individuals to study. They come on their own, with their own funding, but while they're here, we don't charge them for training that they receive here. What's really exciting about that program is then they return to their homeland and they are able to pass those skills on. We had one young lady that came from the Philippines, and she has now trained over 1,000 people. She has conducted seminars all over the Philippines, and typically there's 90 to 100 at her seminars. And so she's been able to pass on what she has learned here. Just got an email yesterday from a young lady that is in India, and she too has conducted seminars and workshops passing on her skills. In addition to that, when funds are earmarked as such, we do send our professional teams into other nations to provide training that they are not able to get there. We conducted a 4-day seminar in China as requested by the Chinese government, conducted a 4-day seminar on autism. And so we do go also out around the world when there are earmarked funds for that, because we don't use operating funds to accomplish that. So we do have people now coming from all over the world. We also work with over 11 colleges and universities here in Tulsa. Just over the last year alone, we've had over 1,000 college and university students coming in to learn and study at the Little Lighthouse for how to work with these children. And so, as I said, our classrooms have really become a classroom to our world. We also now have a Little Lighthouse in Mississippi and a Little Lighthouse in Denton, Texas. And we call these our affiliates. And they now, in fact, just yesterday, we said goodbye to to 2 teams who had come in for training. So they look to Little Lighthouse headquarters, which we now consider ourselves to be, for training. So we mentor them, we help them get established through teaching and training. They do have to generate their own funds for their own Little Lighthouses in the other states. But we had families literally uproot from other states and move here to get these services. And so when we had strong appeals to replicate in other states, we finally felt that it was time to respond to that. And about 6 years ago, we began the replication process, and we hope to have Little Lighthouses across the nation one day, beyond Mississippi and Texas.
Wow. Did you ever imagine the impact?
No, I really didn't. I've often talked about how God is so merciful with us. He when we respond to his calling, he will just illuminate one little stepping stone at a time. Once you get on the next one, then he will illuminate the next. And so in no way could I ever have envisioned the end of the pathway that he had for me. Never would have imagined that he was calling me to a life. Really, it has been my life work of this work. But interestingly, if I go back in my story and back to the beginning of this interview, you asked what I had wanted to be when I was in high school. And I aspired to be a speech pathologist. And I never became a speech pathologist. But now I direct a staff of speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists. We have a registered nurse, assistive technology specialist, a low vision specialist, special education teachers from a wide diversification of specializations, a wonderful team of associates. And so he has me in the middle of the world that I had really wanted, in the middle of the field of study that I had wanted. I never dreamed Never dreamed of this. Interestingly, as I mentioned, I majored in speech and drama. And so as I was scrubbing floors of the first little school that we opened and stripping walls and painting and so on, I thought, I will never use my speech and drama now if this is what I'm going to be doing. And little did I know that I would be doing over 1,000 speaking engagements over the next years. And so I did use my speech and drama. And so, probably for those who might ever hear this interview, I would just offer this, that this is not an original analogy, but I've heard of the analogy that our life is like a tapestry. And God sees the picture on the top. We kind of see all the strings and so on underneath. And so not always does it look like the picture. And can we understand the picture? But God has a perfect picture of what he wants our life to be. I believe now with all my heart that God orchestrated every part of my life, even to working in the bakery. Now, I don't know about the killing flies, but I do know that that in the back of the bakery, I was taught to work hard. And God knew I would have to be able to work hard to continue this work during times that were really difficult. And I do believe that in the back of the bakery, I was also taught integrity. I worked across from some ladies that didn't have much in this world when I decorated with them. And I gained a real appreciation for people from all walks of life and have that to this day. One of our most treasured contributors to the Little Lighthouse was a gentleman that actually, the first time he ever visited us and presented his contribution, presented us with a baby food jar of nickels and dimes and quarters. And I don't have time to tell his whole story. It is in my book, Milestones and Miracles, but we eventually learned that he lived in an old renovated school bus, and his heat was the flame from a gas stove. And his bed was a mattress thrown in this gutted school bus. And I treasured him as a friend, and feel that God placed high value on his donations. As much value as he might place on, a $1,000 gift or a $10,000 gift. Don't get me wrong, I certainly am grateful for all those people that have given and been used of God so graciously. I believe we live in one of the most wonderful communities, wonderful states, and wonderful communities in the world. And that has to be true if this community has supported this work since 1972. And God working through them has not allowed us to ever go a dime in debt. That's got to be a miracle, but it's also got to be a wonderful community that is obedient to God and willing to be used of God to give through them.
Do you ever keep up with your students post-graduation?
We do, and we love to hear from them. And it's real interesting. They'll just kind of stroll in from time to time, and it's very exciting to see. As I mentioned earlier in the interview, I am a huge believer in the importance of early intervention. And I was, when Missy was born, but I am even more so now because I've seen the impact that it can have. I know one young man that was developmentally delayed, especially in the arena of speech. He is now working out at American Airlines. We did a wonderful follow-up story on him recently. One of our little girls with Down syndrome was actually homecoming queen at her high school in Dallas. And the national, I don't know if it's which major network, but one of the major networks, she made national news on one of the major networks, and they covered her story. She is an inspiration to her whole school. We consistently hear of remarkable stories of remarkable success of these children. When we go out around the world, when I've had opportunities to speak in other nations, one of the things I like to do is to advocate for the value of these children because, as you know, as probably most of your listeners know, there are many countries where these children are not given an opportunity for an education and in many cases are allowed to die. And I have a real heart and a real passion to be able to advocate for those children and to change that paradigm and help people to see these children have incredible potential. It's up to us to find the keys to unlock that. And I believe in the key finding process. God uses these children to impact us far more than we'll be able to impact them. So, I really, I've seen the value of it. I've seen these children become remarkable successes. When I go out to other nations to speak, what I like to do is to share what I call success shorts, short success stories about those who have been faced with what would seem to some to be insurmountable challenges and how they have overcome them. Many of the countries where I've been, they've never heard of Helen Keller. I love to tell that story. Talk about an amazing success story. She is it. But I also love to tell them the story of our own daughter. Because in many countries, the thought of someone legally blind driving would be out of the realm of any kind of possibility. But I also love to share the stories of the children who, at best, maybe all we're able to teach them is to communicate by a nod of the head. Maybe we're able to get them to grip a finger. I love to share with people the worth of those children. What I wish our whole world could do is to see these children from God's perspective, because each one of them have tremendous value and worth. Years ago, there was a neonatal pediatrician. At that time, there were only like 15 in the nation, and she was volunteering in our classroom. So I was quite curious to know why on earth this woman who could earn so much per hour of her life was volunteering for us in our classroom. And I went down to meet her, and I asked her the question, why are you giving freely your time here? And she said, well, I was invited to one of your community luncheons. We have community luncheons on a regular basis, still do, and just invite people to come and learn more about us. And she said, I was taken on a tour and given the opportunity to look in through these observation windows at these children. And when that happened, I saw children just like ones that I have pulled the plug on. And tears came to her eyes, and she said, I'm here to give back. And she volunteered for quite some time. And at that time, she was between contracts and just waiting for that to be negotiated out. But she was a dear friend to the Little Lighthouse. And I saw that paradigms can change just by individuals learning about, seeing about, being around these children. It's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about our college and university training program. Because as these nursing students and doctors and therapists and teachers come in and they see these children, it changes their paradigm. And I believe that hospital care for children with special needs, in time, if enough are trained to understand the value of the lives of these children, I think it'll change. The seminar that we did in China, at the very end of the last day, we gave the Chinese delegates an opportunity to share what they had learned. And I will never forget one Chinese lady coming to the microphone, and she said this. She said, in the part of China where I come from, we consider always these children as trouble. But because you have come and you have taught us and what we have learned, we now see these children as flowers with potential to blossom. And we knew that our message had gotten through. And when we have students come from other parts of the world, that is the one thing that they pretty consistently share with us. That is one of the most important things that they have learned, is the potential of these children.
Well, you wrote a book. Tell me about your book.
Well, it's called Milestones and Miracles, and on the front of it says the story of the little lighthouse, and it is. It is our story. For years, I would be given opportunity to go out and speak, and people would want to know, well, how did it get started, and how do you survive? And I would share with them. It's what I would call one God story after another. And I would always leave frustrated because there's so much more I wanted to tell them. And I didn't have time. And a very, very dear friend of mine, whenever we would have lunch, especially if we had others there, she'd say, tell them this story, tell them that story. And she would always end the conversation with, when are you going to write that book? And I always knew God was calling me to one day write a book, but I had scribbled notes on napkins and legal pads and note paper, and my notes were everywhere, and I almost lost my opportunity. I had a really close call and ended up being rushed to St. Francis Hospital here in Tulsa by EMSA. And I just remember as they were transferring me to the operating table, bargaining with God and saying, if you will just give me one more chance, I promise I'll write it. I had always just been too busy. And so after that, I went home and I began gathering up all my notes, which took a while, and began to pen the story that I believe God had given to me to share. And because you see, I believe with all my heart that God established the little lighthouse for these children with special needs, to give them every opportunity to develop to their maximum potential. But I also believe that God established the little lighthouse to have a platform in which he could share his love with all of his children, all of us, to be able to demonstrate that he is still alive and well, and he is still in the miracle working business. Because in this 21st century, we are still seeing miracles around every corner. And I define a miracle as something you really can't explain from a human point of view. It had to be God. And so this book is filled with God stories and miracle stories, and the stories of how God grew this ministry and how he provided every inch of the way. And I really felt literally pregnant with the book, and it was just a relief just to deliver it. And I honestly did not know but what it might just remain in a safety deposit box for the rest of my life. But a precious woman was determined that it would be published and helped to get it published. And we have now sold and given away thousands of copies over the years. But it's God's story.
You'll have to revise it soon.
I do plan to actually do Milestones and Miracles 2, if God gives me the chance. I'm not sure that that'll be the title. I think rather the title might be Divine Connections, because I have seen God literally connect people who don't even know each other, literally from all over the world, to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish.
And you're still going strong with it.
We're still going strong. The ministry is still going strong, and the Lord willing, I will stay with it as long as he calls me here. I think we just have 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, George Bush named the Little Lighthouse one of his points of light. How did that come about?
Well, I'm not even sure how he heard about us and how it came about. Frankly, that we were named, we were just stunned to learn about it. And I do remember when the call came in from the White House, the receptionist thought it was a joke and almost didn't put the call through. But it was a very exciting time for us, and we were so honored. Actually, the big focus of his program, Thousand Points of Light, was focusing on volunteering, as most people know. And I thought it was an incredible tribute to our ministry, but also to the community of Tulsa and to our volunteer program. Little Lighthouse is one of the most volunteer intensive programs in the city. We now utilize over 100 volunteers, where we really have a goal of more than 200 volunteers that we utilize on a regular basis under this roof. And we cannot do what we need to do in the classrooms without them. These children need a one-on-one, and our goal for our children is one-on-one. I've not really talked about it very much, but when these children come in off of our waiting list, they are seen by a team of professionals, and then we meet with the parents, and we use a transdisciplinary team approach in developing a very individualized prescriptive program. The chairman of our board loves to refer to us as kind of the Mayo Clinic approach to special education, because we really do utilize the entire team. The parents are involved, our physical therapists, our occupational therapists, our speech therapists, our teachers, our assistive technology specialists, our low vision specialists, all of them work together. So we're really approaching the children, from all directions, all areas of their development. And then we design a prescriptive program just for that child. So in order to carry out such a prescriptive and individualized program, we really do need one-on-one for most of the children. So we have a lot of volunteers. We're always needing more.
Do you have to keep up with the trends in education?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that question, because we have begun hosting conferences here at the Little Lighthouse, professional conferences, where we invite other professionals, other speech therapists or physical therapists from all over the state to come and join us as we bring well-known national speakers in to provide, state-of-the-art techniques and coaching. And the beauty for us is that our entire staff can be trained, and we don't have to pay for them to go across the nation to get that training. And we're able to kind of link arms with other professionals in the community. We don't believe in operating as an island, and we love to connect with professionals from all over our community and share information, exchange information. We need to be putting our heads together, not pulling apart, in order to really best meet the needs of these children. So now we do host professional conferences for that very reason, just to keep us current.
All right, we're picking back up with Marcia Mitchell. This is part 2 of our interview. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, let's begin today by learning a little bit about, we learn the background we need from our careers in many different places. It's not always the classroom. Sometimes it is. Where do you think you've learned the most for the career you have today?
I may have talked about this a little bit last time, but I think that, funny as it may seem, working in the back of my parents' bakery taught me a lot. I didn't like it at the time because it was hard. Bakeries are typically not air conditioned in the part that I was working in, but it did teach me perseverance and stamina, and that you just have to work hard in life. And though I've been totally dependent upon the Lord for provision, at the same time, God expects us to apply ourselves. And so it has required a lot of hard work. And I think had my parents not taught me to work hard, I don't think I could have endured for 4 decades. So I'm very grateful for that. I think there were also just some real practical work ethics that went along with just working hard and working smart. And that has been very important within this career. I think also I gained a sensitivity towards children with special needs and individuals with special needs through a friend that I had when I was a little girl. She was totally blind, and I used to read stories to her on our back porch step, and she introduced me to a blind piano teacher, and I think I gained sensitivity from him as I took piano from him. Uh, so I think those kind of experiences increase my sensitivity to individuals with disabilities. Um, in addition to that, the people that I worked with in the back of the bakery, uh, I think imparted to me a real sensitivity to people from all walks of life and all socioeconomic levels. And I developed, I think, a real love just for people. And so I think those are probably the things that helped me most.
Well, looking back on um, the career and the work you have done and continue to do, let's talk about career highlights.
Okay, well, certainly one would have to be one that immediately comes to mind. Was, of course, our founding, that day that we actually opened the doors, because it was a dream come true. We got the doors open. It was October 3rd of 1972. I will never forget that day. We had been scrubbing floors and painting walls and getting everything ready. And when we had that first day where 5 little children came through the doors, and we had 5 volunteers and 1 teacher in this little tiny frame house, it was a huge day for us. But I think another really significant highlight was a moment in time when I was actually in China. And it was a fairly small geographic area, but a very dense population. It was geographic area of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and the population of Tulsa, Oklahoma, if you can imagine. But it was an area where a young international intern who had studied at the Little Lighthouse was opening his own center. After studying here, he carried those skills back and opened a center for children with special needs in China. And we got to be there for the dedication. And it's very different from our dedications here. There were lots of fireworks going off and many government officials attending it that day. And the children, most of them were deaf, but yet they danced for us. And it was just an incredible, incredible day. We were so moved by the dedication of all the people that had surrounded this young man. But one significant thing was I asked him, I said, obviously you all have been open for a few weeks. What was the actual date that you opened your doors? And he thought about it for a minute, and he said, October 3, which was the exact same date as we had opened our doors. And he had no way of knowing that. And it was just a very special moment I think it was, goodness, we had already been in existence for well over 20 years, and to see this young man starting a center similar to the Little Lighthouse on the other side of the globe, partly because of the influence of the Little Lighthouse, was extremely rewarding, a very special highlight. And then, of course, inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame was a very, very special day for me.
Well, speaking of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame, when you were notified that you were going to be inducted, what was going through your mind?
Well, I remember we were on the road. We were in the car, and I didn't recognize the phone number, so I almost didn't take the call. And when I realized who it was and what she wanted, I was completely taken back. I had no idea. And, it's a very humbling moment. You think of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame, and, immediately some pretty amazing people come to mind. And so to be inducted alongside so many amazing and remarkable and inspirational women was truly humbling.
And do you remember who presented you at the ceremony?
Yes. Give me just a second. I know her name.
Was it Pam Peterson?
Yes, it was Pam. And I'm always getting her name mixed up with Missy taught her daughter music, and there's another lady that I'm always getting their names mixed up. So, yes, it was a wonderful honor to be actually to, what do you call it, inducted.
Mm-hmm.
It was a wonderful honor to be inducted by Pam Peterson.
Did you have lots of people in attendance that day?
We did. We had a big crowd, and I wasn't really anticipating that. But actually, we have some relatives in Oklahoma City, and so they were all there. And my precious mother-in-law and aunt and sister and nephew, and the list just went on and on. I had quite a little cheering crew there. I also had some wonderful staff members that had come over for the day. So it did all make me feel very, very special.
Well, everybody seemed to have quite a crowd there at the History Center, so it was a very wonderful atmosphere.
It was packed.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great day.
Mm-hmm. Well, you stood up on that stage and you accepted the award, and through the years, you have probably made a difference not only in the lives of many, many children, but you've probably inspired a lot of people that have worked for you here. How do you feel that now people look at you as that role model?
Well, to be honest with you, I hope they look right past me. That would really be the desire of my heart. There's a scripture that talks about loving to boast in my weakness. And I really identify with that, because I know that I had been taught to work hard, but I did not have any of the skills or the knowledge to establish a ministry for children with special needs, much less a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I didn't even know what that was when we started. So I really lacked the skills, I lacked the knowledge, but even though I was a very ordinary person, I had taught school for 3 years. The other co-founder was a housewife. We were trusting in a very big God. And the one thing that I would hope that people would see, when I say see right past me, I would hope that they would see the big God that I serve, and to see that the more inadequate you feel, the more you lean on God. And the more you lean on God, the more He is strength and His power is revealed. And I think that has happened here. We're sitting in a beautiful 22,000 square foot facility that was tailor designed to meet the needs of these children. And, that's come from a little tiny frame house with just 5 children. Hundreds of children have been served over the years. Now has a global outreach. This project was $2.2 million. We moved into it debt-free. I can't explain that any other way other than a miracle. And I define a miracle as a divine intervention, something that happens, you just can't explain it any other way. And the fact that we are tuition-free, providing these services at no tuition to these families, receive no government funding, people that are even skeptics would have to quickly say, and oftentimes do, yep, that would seem like it would have to be a miracle. And it really is. We depended upon the Lord in the very beginning. We continue to depend upon the Lord today. Now our budget's like $1.7 million. We've launched a $16 million capital campaign. We're almost 76% of the way toward our goal. That just has to be a work of God. So my prayer would be that people would actually not see me, but see the God that I serve.
I think the work that you do, though, and how it's been replicated in other places, and how you're able to reach out and work with so many others, not only here in the United States but abroad, really speaks to the impact you have had on many.
The work has gone way beyond anything I ever dreamed. I had dreams and aspirations that it would be a very well-established center serving many children, but never in my wildest dreams did I imagine a global outreach. Never did I imagine that we would be actually training 1,000 college university students a year who come and rely on the Little Lighthouse for practicums and internships and observations. Never in a million years did I imagine that we would have individuals from literally all over the globe coming to study here and spend anywhere from 8 weeks to 2 years studying, and then carry those skills back to other parts of the globe and impart those same skills to others. There was one young lady that came and studied with us for 2 years and returned to her homeland in the Philippines and conducted, I don't know, let me back up, and conducted seminars all over the Philippines, and ultimately trained thousands of people as a result of the skills that she gained here. I would love to think that those people are now imparting the same skills onto others. I never would have imagined that we would have a little lighthouse in Mississippi and another one in Texas, with the hope and the dream that one day it would be replicated in other states. But when we began having families actually uproot and move to Tulsa, Oklahoma in order to enroll their child here, that was when we really began to dream of perhaps one day being able to replicate in other states. So in answer to your question, no, I never imagined that the little lighthouse would be so far-reaching, and that has been extremely rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Well, throughout the course of your interview, you've made mention of many people who've played a key role in your life and in the Little Lighthouse. Is there anybody you would like to acknowledge at this point?
Oh, well, there are so many people that gets a little difficult because you don't want to leave anybody out. But I would say that, and this lady has no idea that she has no idea who I am, nor that she ever had an impact on my life. But Dale Evans Rogers wrote a wonderful little book that changed my life, and it's called Angel Unaware. I'm sure many of the people that will be in your viewing audience will have heard of it or read it. But that little book completely changed my life. And so I'm very much in her debt. Dale Evans Rogers has served as an incredible inspiration to my life. And then there was a gentleman named George Mueller, who actually lived in the 18th century, who was totally dependent upon God and had such an incredible amount of faith that he was able to accomplish extraordinary things, even though he was an ordinary man. And I think he was another one that really has impacted my life. But in the here and now, there have been many wonderful friends that have been an encouragement along the way. They have been cheerleaders, if you will, for the ministry as well as for my own personal efforts. And when I got discouraged, they were there. I certainly would have to say my husband and my daughter, who have sacrificed a lot in order to allow me to do what I feel that God has called me to do. And I will be forever grateful to them for being willing to make those sacrifices. People have a tendency to see me and to think of sacrifices that I have made. But truly, theirs have been huge sacrifices, and I would want my world to know the sacrifices that they made. There's also a group of women early on in the history of the Little Lighthouse that really discipled me. They really taught me how to trust and how to live day by day, really relying on the Lord to be my strength and to be my guide, and to live by what I call biblical principles. And I mention them in my book, and I'm very, very grateful to them. There are others that I do mention in my book. Very special lady named Alma Robson, who was a mentor to me for a number of years. Another lady named Aline Murdoch, who was the director of the Recreation Center for the Physically Limited, that allowed us to use the little building next to theirs, who was also another wonderful mentor. So I've been very, very blessed over the years by having a number of wonderful people that have served as inspirations to me.
Well, if you could give advice to fellow Oklahomans today, what would you tell them?
If you can dream it, you can do it if God's calling you to it. There's an illustration that I love to use that if God said, start walking, I hope I would be obedient and start walking. And if God said, keep walking, I pray I would be obedient and keep walking. And if I came to the edge of a cliff and God said, keep going, I pray I would be obedient and keep walking, but I would make real sure it's God talking and instructing me before I would do that. And that's why I say if you can dream it, you can do it, if God's calling you to it, because I believe if God calls, does not call the equipped, but rather he equips those he calls. And if he has called you to do something, then I believe he will give you everything you need to accomplish it. And I believe God is calling all of us to reach out to our fellow man. You know, I think we're born to bring glory to God. We are born to be a blessing to others. And so, you know, you find what that is that you're to do in service to God, and you trust him to equip you to do it. And so I encourage people to find, to seek God as to what is their assignment. Because if they seek God and they find their assignment, they're going to make their world a better place one way or another. If they really trust him to give them everything they need to accomplish that assignment. I think if everybody in the whole wide world was doing that, we'd be living in a different world.
Most definitely. For women who find themselves in similar positions that you were in, especially early on, any words of advice, wisdom you could share?
Pray. Because that's what I started doing in the very beginning. We had no services. I had a child that I knew needed early intervention, yet it was not out there. I knew I did not know enough to be able to help her, to be able to stay on developmental level. And so I did something my mother had always taught me to do, and that was to pray. And the rest is history. But I would just encourage them to pray. I would also encourage them to seek mentors, someone that they can talk to, someone that can help them get beyond the emotion of the situation, and to begin really thinking clearly about, well, I'm in this situation, what does God want to do through this? There's also another scripture that I love. All things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. And that was a real turning point in my life when I stopped asking why. Why has this happened to me? Why were we given this child that is potentially blind? But began to ask God how he could use our circumstances for good. When I began to ask how instead of why, God began to turn things around. And so that's something else I would encourage people, if they've been faced with a crisis or what would seem to be something very sad or very traumatic in their life, instead of asking why, begin asking how God might be able to use that situation for good.
Well, looking to the future, what's next on the agenda for you?
Well, we have some pretty big dreams. Actually, years ago, right after we built this building, I had surgery and I was recouping. And I remember I had to do these exercises, and I was laying on the bed doing these horrible exercises, and said, well, Lord, where to from here? Am I done? Have I finished my assignment? And like I said, we had just moved in here, and been a pretty exciting thing. We'd come from just a few thousand square feet to this, 22,000 square foot facility, beautiful facility. And I will never forget I will never forget the words, not audible, but very, very strongly heard in my mind. We've just begun. And it took my breath away. It really caught my attention. And I really felt like the Lord was revealing to me some direction that we were to go in the future. Part of that direction has to do with our affiliates, little lighthouses that are in other states. At that time, that really was not even a dream. It was just something that I really felt impressed that day, that he was saying the little lighthouse is to replicate across the nation, which was pretty overwhelming to me in that moment. Now it's not quite so overwhelming now that we have one in Mississippi and one in Texas, but at the time it seemed pretty overwhelming. And then he also really began to impress upon me as something else that has actually come about, and that is our college and career students as well as international students. He began impressing upon me that the Little Lighthouse classrooms would actually become a classroom, that in the process of helping these children, we would be teaching others how to help these children, that we were to have a model program that people from literally around the world would come and study the most effective techniques, the latest state-of-the-art approaches to working with these children. Again, that thought was also pretty overwhelming to me. And then there was another very clear impression, and that was that we were to become a platform in which people across America would come to realize that so many of these families don't have a church home because people in churches really don't know how to reach out to these children. They feel inadequate. And that one day, and this is a dream that has not been realized, but I pray that there will be an opportunity for us to actually be used of God in this way, and that is to equip churches across America to be able to reach out to these children, open their doors. You know, it's a pretty typical situation if you take a little child that has cerebral palsy or is blind, whatever, to Sunday school, for the Sunday school teacher to throw up her hands and say, but I don't know how to help him. I don't know how to teach him. And that's understandable. With the Bible-based curriculum that we've been working on for over 2 decades, that is actually designed for typical children, but makes adjustments and adaptations for children with special needs. This will actually enable preschools, Sunday schools, even vacation Bible schools, but churches across America to be able to use this curriculum for typical children, but also that when they have a child with special needs come into their classroom, they'll be able to actually work with that child and make a difference. It's a curriculum that will actually help open hearts and open doors to these children, and I think can make a huge difference for children and their families across America. That dream has not been realized, but I pray that we're in the neonatal, I believe we are in the neonatal stages towards making that a reality.
It seems like an area that really hasn't been focused on.
It is. It's the population of individuals with disabilities is the largest unreached population in America.
And to be able to offer some type of curriculum to
Yes.
churches to let them know this is how you can help,
Yes.
I think would make all the difference.
I believe so too. I have a friend that is now speaking in places all across America, speaking to pastors and in seminaries. And the one thing he continues to get is, we're willing, we don't know how, and give us a curriculum. Well, we only have a curriculum for the preschool level, but you know, if you can begin to teach little tykes, you know what, there's really not that much difference between you and this little guy that can't see.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you may not be able to hop as well as your buddy Jimmy, but you may be able to draw better. We all have different abilities, and to help children to be able to see these are just children who are differently abled, and to be able to find what these kiddos can do. If we can start there, then when they get a little older, they are not going to be fearful if they see somebody in a wheelchair in a grocery store, or somebody walking down the sidewalk with a cane. Um, I think we will be able to, I think we can overcome the fear factor in adults if we can start at the child level. We're not aware, and there may be, but we are not aware, have not found another preschool curriculum, that Bible-based curriculum that has adaptations for children with special needs. And so it is our prayer, our dream to publish that, not only across America, but that it would be distributed around the world and make a big difference for children with special needs being able to be accepted into settings where currently they are not.
And looking at the future expansion of the Little White House, you're in the middle or towards the tail end of a capital campaign.
We are. Actually, we are hopefully toward the end, very close to our goal of being able to build a 68,000 square foot expansion to our 22,000 square foot facility. Once built, we will be able to serve twice as many children. We'll be able to serve between 120 and 150 children here and meet their very individualized needs through state-of-the-art educational and therapy services. But as I mentioned before, what is really exciting about that is this facility will also provide observatories where, whether they're coming from around the world or whether they're coming from across town, a college or a university across town, they will be able to sit in observatories that are similar to surgical theaters and look down into two different classrooms and learn. They'll be almost like a classroom observatory. And again, as I mentioned before, what is really exciting is that our classrooms are becoming a classroom. The Little Lighthouse has kind of moved from being a quality, state-of-the-art preschool or early childhood Christian developmental center for children with special needs to a training center. And the training ground is our classrooms. But really, we feel like we can impact thousands more children by training others in how to work with these children. Yes, we can serve between 120 and 150 children when we build this new facility. But how much greater would it be if we can impact thousands, just like we have impacted children in the Philippines and in China and in Russia and in Costa Rica and in Mexico, different places that we have been, and we have conducted seminars or we have trained individuals who have come and studied here, and now they are making a difference in children around the world. So I think it's a real efficient way of being able to impact children all over the world in the process of impacting the lives of these children here.
Any time frame on when you'll break ground on the new project?
When we have all the funding.
That's a good answer.
When we have all the funding, which we hope is in the next few months. And we are very, very hopeful that we will be able to break ground within the next 6 months.
Wow, that's great. Well, as we come kind of towards the tail end of the interview, looking back, and this wasn't on the question guide, so I'll throw it out there for you. What does Oklahoma mean to you?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, I'm a native Oklahoman, and there aren't that many of us around anymore. I'm a native Oklahoman, and I'm a native Tulsan, and I'm proud of it. I just think we live in the most wonderful state, and I have to say the most wonderful city. I've always loved Tulsa. I've always loved Oklahoma. I just think it is. I love being in the buckle of the Bible Belt, but also the people are they're just friendly. They're warm. We hear that all the time. All you have to do is to visit an area that is not so friendly, and then you come back and you're really glad you're home. But in addition to that, I would have to say how moved and how blessed I have been being in Tulsa. I believe with all my heart that this is truly one of the most benevolent cities in the world. You can't have a center, 501c3 developmental center for children with special needs, that's providing tuition-free services, receives no federal funding. We also don't happen to receive United Way. We are not eligible for that. And so, given that set of circumstances on a financial level, for us to have been able to start out with just a prayer and a dream and $3,000 almost 40 years ago, and today to have a global outreach, to be training over 1,000 students a year, college university students, to be able to have individuals from all over the world coming and training here, to be launching a $16 million facility expansion, be sitting in a facility that is debt-free, that says two things to me. One, I serve a mighty God, and that there are thousands of people in this community who are open to God working through their lives to make a difference in the lives of others. We have had delegations from over 23 nations visit the Little Lighthouse. And one of the questions that I typically get, especially from developing nations that really do not value the lives of children with special needs, they're intrigued when they walk in these doors that this whole building is totally dedicated to helping these children. They're pretty intrigued, but what intrigues them even more is how this is funded. And typically after we take them on a tour and show them hospitality, we will sit down and oftentimes they will ask, so where does the money come from? And I love to be able to tell them, and I will typically say, well, we have trusted in God from the very beginning. But we know that God works through people. And there are many, many wonderful people in this community who have allowed God to work through them to give very generously. And typically they will say, why? Why do they do that? Why do they give? And, I'm able to just simply respond, because they care about other people. And I don't know that you can say that everywhere you go. I just think it is such an incredible, the Little Lighthouse itself is such an incredible tribute to the Tulsa community, Tulsa and surrounding areas. It's just an incredible tribute.
Is there anything you'd like to add that I haven't asked you about?
Yes. Something that I think a lot of people don't know about the Little Lighthouse is how volunteer intensive we are. Little Lighthouse truly is one of the most volunteer intensive organizations in the city of Tulsa. And if I could put something on the front page of the newspaper, I would put Little Lighthouse is always in need of volunteers, and that they don't have to come with previous training. Excuse me, we will provide that training.
Volunteers can be old and young and everybody in between?
Volunteers are all ages. Let me back up. Volunteers actually, to serve in the classroom, must be 14 years of age. And they go all the way up. In fact, just recently we were doing a videotaping, and we videotaped this darling little volunteer that has been here for 4 years. And even I did not realize that she was 82 years old when she began serving in the classroom. She is now 86. And she will tell you, and she said in front of the camera, that she thinks the Little Lighthouse is actually keeping her alive. and she shared it with such joy. And truly, I've watched before my very eyes her just seem to come to more and more life, and she can get around more easily than she ever did before. And she is just a delight to us. So, yeah, no matter how old you are, you can still make a difference in these classrooms. We can accommodate. Ideally, a volunteer would be able to get up and down off the floor and so on. But, if they've got a heart for these children and they have a desire to serve them, then we will train them. In some cases, we have volunteers that come in and they just read stories to the children. In other cases, they actually are carrying out individual activities with the children that have been prescribed for them. We need individuals who just really want to give their heart, give some time, and make a difference.
Well, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
If history was written about me, I would hope that it would say that I was obedient to follow the calling that God had placed on my life, that I did not grow weary in well doing, and that people were able to see through my life that I was a very ordinary person serving an extraordinary God for some remarkable children. I would hope that history would record me as a loving wife, a loving mother, most importantly, dedicated child of God. And my prayer would be that I would finish my assignment.
Marcia, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for such a wonderful honor. I truly am humbled by it.